The fluorescent light above the break room hummed the way fluorescent lights always do. Not quite music, not quite silence, just a persistent reminder that some spaces are designed for function and nothing else. Clare Whitmore stood at the coffee machine in a cardigan she'd owned since 2009, waiting for a cup she didn't particularly need. The cardigan was gray, slightly pilled at the elbows, the kind of thing you'd find at a Value Village and think, someone's grandmother left this behind. She had paid $12 for it deliberately 3 weeks ago. The man who walked in didn't look up right away. He was carrying a clipboard, wearing a Carhartt jacket with a small tear at the left cuff, and he moved through the doorway the way people move through spaces they've crossed 1,000 times, without ceremony, without announcement. He set the clipboard on the counter, reached past her for the coffee pot, and said, "Sorry, just need a refill. Go ahead," Clare said. He poured. She watched. His name, she would learn in about 40 seconds, was Graham Cole. He was the building's head of facilities maintenance. He had worked at Whitmore Financial's Toronto headquarters for 11 years. He had a daughter in 2nd grade named Sophie, a truck with 200,000 kilometers on it, and, according to the personnel file Clare had read the previous evening at her actual desk on the 14th floor, a commendation from the city of Hamilton for volunteer work he'd done after the flooding in 2019. She had read that file because she had asked her assistant, Rachel Bennett, to pull backgrounds on a dozen people across 3 departments. She had not told Rachel why. Graham Cole picked up his clipboard and his coffee and nodded at her with the particular economy of a man who considers basic courtesy non-negotiable but doesn't dress it up. "Have a good one," he said. "You too," said Clare. He left. She stood there another moment, looking at the coffee she hadn't poured yet, listening to the hum of the light. 34 days earlier, Clare Whitmore had sat across a boardroom table from a man named David Holt and listened to him spend 45 minutes explaining why she should trust him with her company's pension fund reallocation. David Holt had gone to Upper Canada College. He had a Rolex and a very firm handshake. He had called her Claire 3 times without being invited to. And he had looked, just once, at the door behind her when she suggested the terms weren't favorable enough. The specific look of a man calculating whether the decision-maker in the room was actually the one he was talking to. She had passed on David Holt. She had also passed on the last 4 men her friend Andrea had tried to introduce her to, and the 2 before that. Not because anything was wrong with them, precisely, but because something was missing, and Clare had long since stopped being able to name what it was. She was 51 years old. She ran a company with 312 employees, offices in 4 cities, and a client portfolio that managed just over $2 billion in assets. She had built most of it herself, after inheriting a struggling mid-size firm from her father and spending 7 years making it into something that actually worked. She wore the gray cardigan and ate lunch at her desk and drove a 2014 Honda Civic that her CFO had once accidentally photographed next to her own vehicle in the parking garage, a comparison that had briefly circulated among the executive floor as a kind of joke. Clare was not entirely sure was meant kindly. She did not own the gray cardigan because she couldn't afford otherwise. She owned it because, about 6 months ago at a charity gala where she'd been wearing a dress that cost more than some people's rent, a man she'd been seeing for 3 months, a portfolio manager named Terrence, had leaned over during dessert and said, quietly and without particular malice, "I've been thinking we should probably talk to your estate lawyer together at some point, just to get aligned." They had been dating for 3 months. She had excused herself to the washroom, stood at the sink for 2 minutes, and then returned to the table and ended it with a precision that Terrence would later describe to mutual friends as kind of terrifying. She wasn't angry at Terrence, or not only angry, she was tired. She was tired in the specific way that comes from realizing you've been performing a version of yourself that other people find valuable, and that the performance has gone on long enough that you've half forgotten what you look like without it. So she bought the cardigan. She transferred her personal email to a name that didn't appear in any masthead, C. Whitmore, which was common enough to mean nothing. She arranged with her HR director, a careful and discreet woman named Amelia Whitmore, no relation, though people always checked, to briefly list her in the system as a contracted administrative consultant, and she started coming in through the side entrance, taking her coffee in the break room on the 2nd floor, eating lunch in the cafeteria. She told herself it was research. She told herself she wanted to understand what was happening on the ground level of her own company. She told herself a lot of things. Graham Cole came back into the break room 2 days later because the photocopier on the second floor was making a sound. He explained to no one in particular, like a cat trying to eat a stapler. He had a tool bag with him and an expression of mild, focused patience. Claire was at the table with a sandwich and a report she was pretending to read. "That's been going on since Tuesday," she said. "I know." He crouched down beside the machine. "I've been waiting for a part. Does it usually take this long? Depends what breaks." He opened the side panel. "This one's on me, honestly. I flagged it in September and got told to wait until Q4 budget." She watched him work for a moment. His hands were steady and unhurried. There was a grease stain on his right wrist that he'd clearly scrubbed at, but not entirely removed. "Graham, right?" she said. He looked up, mildly surprised she knew his name. "Yeah, you're Claire?" "Yes. You knew?" "Sort of," she said. "Contract." He nodded and turned back to the machine. Not disinterested exactly, just not performing interest he didn't have. "What kind of contract work?" "Administrative. Process review." "Fun," he said, in the tone of someone who knows it isn't but won't be rude about it. She found herself almost smiling. What gave it away? No one describes their own job as process review unless they're apologizing for it. She did smile then, and he didn't see it because he was elbow deep in a photocopier, which was maybe why it felt safe. The part arrived Thursday. She happened to be in the break room again when he came to install it. This time he brought coffee from the cart in the lobby. 2 cups, and set one on the table near her without making it a gesture, without making it anything more than a cup of coffee, placed near a person who was sitting in a room. "Thank you," Claire said. "Machine'll be fixed in 20 minutes if you need copies. I'll survive until then." He laughed. It was short and genuine and surprised her a little. Over the following 2 weeks, she learned things about Graham Cole the way you learn things about people when neither of you is trying to impress the other. He'd grown up in Guelph, gone into trades right out of high school because his father had, and because it made sense at the time. He'd been married for 6 years to a woman named Diane, and he spoke of the end of that marriage with neither bitterness nor false peace, just the quiet acknowledgement of someone who has processed something real. His daughter Sophie was 7 and currently obsessed with the life cycle of monarch butterflies to a degree that he described as genuinely alarming and also kind of great. He drove a 2007 F-150 that he maintained himself. He spent Sunday mornings at the farmer's market near his apartment in Leslieville. Because Sophie liked the honey vendor and he liked the bread, he had never, in 11 years, taken a sick day unless Sophie was sick. Claire knew this last part from the file. She knew some things from the file, and some things from coffee in the break room, and some things from the specific texture of how a person carries themselves when they think no one of consequence is watching. She was aware, distantly and uncomfortably, that she was watching quite closely. The shift happened on a Wednesday in November, 3 weeks into what Claire had not yet named to herself as anything in particular. She was in the cafeteria with a tray. Graham was 2 people ahead of her in line. His phone rang, and he stepped slightly to the side to answer it, and she heard him say, "Hey, Bug. I know. Miss you too. Did you finish your reading? Good. Yeah, I'll be there at 6. We can do the experiment tonight if you want." "The caterpillar one?" "Yeah, of course the caterpillar one." His voice changed when he talked to Sophie, not softer exactly, more still. Like everything else in him that moved through the world, with careful efficiency had somewhere to rest. Claire looked down at her tray. She thought about Terence at the gala. She thought about David Holt and his very firm handshake. She thought about the 8 months after her divorce 11 years ago, when she had worked until midnight, most nights not because the work required it, but because the work was the only space where she knew exactly what she was worth. She thought about the gray cardigan and what she was actually trying to find out. She already knew. That was the part she had been not thinking about for 3 weeks. The cafeteria was serving shepherd's pie. She paid for it and sat down at a table near the window. A few minutes later, Graham set his tray down across from her and said, "You're always at this table." "Good light," she said. "Fair enough." He sat. Outside, the first real snow of the season was starting, not committing to anything yet, just suggesting. "Sophie excited about the snow?" Claire asked. He looked at her for a second, and she realized she'd said the name too easily for someone who'd only heard one phone call. "Sorry," she said. "I overheard the butterfly project. Caterpillar," he corrected, but without accusation. "And yeah, she'll want to build a fort. She always wants to build a fort. That's a good thing to always want." He looked out the window for a moment. "It really is," he said, and meant it plainly. There are moments that don't announce themselves as turning points until considerably later, when you're looking back and trying to locate the exact place where the direction changed. For Claire, she would later decide that Wednesday, in November, Shepherd's first snow, and a man who said it really is about his daughter wanting to build a fort. That was the place. She told Rachel the following morning that she would be resuming normal access to the building. She said the process review was substantially complete. Rachel, who was extremely good at her job and had therefore certainly noticed approximately 15 things she was too professional to mention, said only, "Of course, should I have your regular parking spot reassigned from visitor?" "Please," Claire said. She did not go back to the second-floor break room that week, or the next. She sat on the 14th floor and worked, and told herself this was correct and appropriate and, most importantly, over. She had learned what she needed to learn, or possibly what she had needed to stop pretending she didn't know. She could file it away. She was very good at filing things away. Graham noticed she was gone the way you noticed the absence of something that was part of a background you'd grown accustomed to. Gradually, and then all at once. He didn't think about it in any dramatic way. He thought, contract must have ended. He thought, that's how it goes. He went back to his rounds. But he thought about the table by the window. He thought about the way she'd listened, not performing listening, actually listening, the kind where you can feel the person receiving what you're saying. He thought about her saying, "That's a good thing to always want about Sophie's fort building," and the way. There had been something underneath it that sounded less like an observation about his daughter and more like something she was reminding herself of. He thought about these things briefly and practically, the way he thought about most things, and then he got back to work. The gala was in December. Whitmore Financial held one every year for its client community. A well-run event in a well-appointed hotel ballroom, the kind of thing Claire attended in a dress that did not suggest $12 cardigans, and drove to in a car that did, and felt the gap between those two facts rather more acutely than usual this year. She was talking to a client from Oakville when she saw Graham Cole across the room. For a full 3 seconds, she thought she was wrong. He was wearing a suit, charcoal gray, simply cut, no tie, and he was standing with a glass of sparkling water, talking to her CFO, Douglas Park, with the ease of someone entirely comfortable in the conversation. Douglas was laughing. Graham looked, if anything, faintly amused. Claire excused herself. She crossed the room slowly because she needed the seconds. Graham saw her first. Something moved across his face, recognition, then something more careful, then a kind of quiet she couldn't read. "Claire," he said. "Graham." She felt the inadequacy of both their names. "I didn't know you'd be here. Doug invited me. We coached the same hockey team," he said it simply then. "I didn't realize you were a client." "I'm not," she said. "This is my company's event." The silence that followed was not long, maybe 4 seconds, but it had weight. "Whitmore Financial," he said. "Yes, you're Clare Whitmore. I am." He looked at her. She looked at him. She was aware of the ballroom continuing around them, oblivious and glittering, and of the strange stillness at their particular coordinates within it. "The cardigan," he said finally. "Yes. The contract work. I was trying to." She stopped, started again. "I wanted to understand what the company felt like from the inside, without the context of who I was." It was true. It was also she was fully aware, not the whole truth, and she had the sense that Graham Cole, who was a precise and patient man, knew this. "Okay," he said. "Graham, I should go find Doug." He picked up his water glass. His face was not angry exactly. It was composed in the particular way of someone who has learned to compose themselves before deciding what they actually feel. "It was good to see you, Claire." He walked away without rushing. She stood where she was for a moment, in a dress that cost more than some people's rent, in her own company's ballroom, and understood with sudden clarity that she had managed, in trying to protect herself from being valued for the wrong things, to potentially destroy the only thing she'd found in quite some time that felt like it had value for the right reasons. She did not call him. She told herself she would give him space to decide what he thought, and this was a mature and reasonable instinct, and she acted on it for 11 days before Rachel mentioned, with perfect neutrality, that the facility's request for the break room light repair on 2 had been submitted by someone named G. Cole and was awaiting approval. "Approve it," Claire said. "Of course." She paused. "Is he in today?" Rachel's expression did not change. "I believe he's in the east stairwell, 12 to 14, the handrail." Claire took the east stairs. He was 3 steps above her landing when she came through the door, wrench in hand, and he looked down at her the way people look at things they've been expecting, without admitting they were expecting them. "Hi," she said. "Hi." She had prepared something reasonable and clear. She had thought about it for 11 days and had arrived at language that was honest without being overwhelming, that acknowledged what she'd done without over-explaining it, that left room for him to say no. What she said instead was, "I wasn't testing you." He waited. "I want to be accurate about it," she said. "I wasn't wearing the cardigan and eating in the cafeteria to test anyone. I was hiding. I've been hiding inside my own company for a month, because I was exhausted from people knowing what I was worth before they knew who I was. And I didn't figure out until too late that I'd started looking forward to the break room because of specifically you, not because of the experiment." He turned the wrench in his hand once, looked at the handrail, looked back at her. "You read my personnel file," he said. "Before I knew you, yes. And after, I stopped needing to." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the stairwell's small window, Toronto in December was doing what it does, gray and particular and real. "I'm not interested in your company," he said, not defensively, just as information. "I know. I drive a 2007 truck. I know that too. I make $48,000 a year." "Graham, I'm just saying." "I know," she said again gently. "That's exactly why I'm in a stairwell telling you I'm sorry." Something shifted in the way he was standing. Not much, but she had by this point learned how to read the small increments of Graham Cole. "Sophie keeps asking about the butterfly lady," he said. Claire blinked. "What?" "I told her about a woman I'd been talking to at work who asked good questions. She called you the butterfly lady because—" He made a slight gesture. "She calls people by what she associates with them. You asked about the Monarch project." "I remember. She wants to know if you'd want to come to the science fair in February." He said it looking at the handrail, not at her. "It's at St. Bridget's. She's doing a full migration map. It's pretty serious for a 7-year-old. Claire's throat did something she hadn't expected. "I would like that very much," she said. He looked at her then, full on, unhurried, the way he looked at things he was actually deciding about. "Okay," he said. "Okay. You should know she'll want to explain the whole thing." "I'm a good listener," Claire said. "Yeah," he said. "I know." He turned back to the handrail. She stood there a moment longer in the stairwell that smelled like concrete and radiator heat, and felt something unknot in her chest that she hadn't even fully registered as a knot. "I'll approve the light repair," she said. "Already waited 2 months. Another few days won't kill anyone." She laughed. It echoed in the stairwell. He didn't look up, but one corner of his mouth moved. She took the stairs back down. The science fair was in February, on a Tuesday night that was cold enough to make the windows of St. Bridget's Elementary School fog slightly at the edges. Sophie Cole had positioned her display board at the end of the second row, in what she explained was a strategic location near the judge's path, a phrase she had clearly borrowed from someone. The board was extraordinary. 12 hand-drawn maps tracking monarch butterfly migration routes from Ontario to Michoacan, Mexico, with weather overlays and estimated population data, and a handwritten section at the bottom titled "Why This Matters" that contained, among other things, the sentence, "If we don't pay attention, things disappear and we only notice after." Claire stood in front of it for a long time. Sophie, who had her father's directness and considerably more of her father's face than Graham seemed aware of, stood beside her and said, "The Western population has declined by 97% since the 1980s. "That's devastating," Claire said. "Yes," Sophie said with the gravity of someone who had decided to take something seriously and expected you to also. "My dad says you can't fix what you don't look at." Claire looked at the board, then at Sophie, then, across the gymnasium, at Graham Cole, who was standing near the coat rack talking to another parent and not watching them, or pretending not to, which with Graham was hard to tell. "Your dad's right," Claire said. Sophie nodded, satisfied. "Do you want to see the migration data for the Eastern Flyway? It's on the back panel." Very much, said Claire. Later, after the judges had come and gone, and Sophie had received a blue ribbon she accepted with dignified composure. And then, when she thought no one was looking, pressed to her chest with both hands, the three of them stood in the parking lot of St. Brigid's in the February cold, breath clouding, Sophie's ribbon tucked into her jacket. Graham's truck was parked under a light. Claire's Civic was next to it. Sophie looked between the two vehicles with the frank assessment of a child doing arithmetic. Yours is older, she told Claire. It is, Claire agreed. My dad says you should keep a car as long as it runs. That's also a good philosophy, Claire said. We're going for hot chocolate, Sophie said, the place on Queen with the big marshmallows. Do you want to come? Graham didn't say anything. He was looking at his keys. Sophie, he said quietly. It's a yes or no question, Dad. Claire looked at Graham. He looked at her. There was, in the cold air of that parking lot, the particular kind of quiet that is not empty but full. Full of everything that two people have chosen not to rush, and everything they have learned about each other in stairwells and break rooms and telephone calls overheard in cafeteria lines, and everything that is not yet said but doesn't, at this particular moment, need to be. I'd like that, Claire said, if it's okay. Graham looked down at Sophie, who was already walking toward the truck with the certainty of someone who has never seriously doubted that the answer would be yes. Yeah, he said. It's okay. They drove separately to the place on Queen Street, and the marshmallows were in fact very large, and Sophie explained the Eastern Flyway data in full twice, while Graham sat across the booth from Claire and drank his coffee and occasionally caught her eye over the top of his daughter's head with the look of a man who has spent a long time being careful, and is beginning, slowly and deliberately, to consider what it might feel like to be something else. It was not a perfect story. Claire knew this. She had spent 11 years building a company on the understanding that the clean version of anything is usually the version that left out the parts that were hardest to get right. There would be things to navigate, the gap between their lives, the questions people would ask, the learning curve of being known rather than assessed. But Sophie had a migration map on her bedroom wall now, and Claire had the restaurant's number saved in her phone under big marshmallows, and Graham Cole, who had driven a 2007 truck for 17 years, who had never once asked what anything was worth before deciding whether he valued it, had looked at her in a stairwell and said okay, which was the most unadorned and trustworthy word she had heard in a very long time. Outside, Queen Street moved through the February dark the way the city always does. Without particularly caring, without stopping, full of people making small decisions that occasionally turn out to be the ones that matter. Inside, Sophie was explaining the difference between a chrysalis and a cocoon to a woman who was, for the first time in longer than she could easily say, not performing anything for anyone. She was just listening, and it was enough.